Okay, we're going to look at some CPCTC proofs. Remember that CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So after we prove that triangles are congruent, all of their other pieces that are corresponding are also congruent to each other. Now, on a proof like this, we're going to start with number 1 here. I'm going to go ahead and write out my given. C is the midpoint of BD, and AB is congruent to AD. Now we want to remember that we always want to mark these things in our picture. So if C is the midpoint of BD, BD is a segment, so that tells me that the base of this triangle, those two pieces are congruent. Now as soon as we mark it in our picture, we should probably go ahead and put it in our proof. So BC is congruent to DC, and that is based off of our definition of midpoint. We also are given that AB and AD are congruent to each other. So I'm going to mark those in my picture. Now, whenever we look at a proof, remember we're looking for those 3 things. We're looking for vertical angles, we're looking for reflexive pieces, and we are looking for parallel lines. This one actually has a reflexive piece down the middle, so I'm going to mark it. And I'm also going to put that in my statements. So AC is congruent to itself. It is used in both triangles. That is my reflexive property of congruence. I have enough now to prove that my 2 triangles are congruent. Yesterday, that was the goal. Today, we're going to take it a couple of steps further. So let's go ahead and name my triangles. If I use triangle ABC, remember that we have to keep our corresponding parts together. So then I would use ADC for the other side. I did mark 3 sets of sides congruent, so it is side, side, side congruence. Now, here's our part that's new for today. If I want to know that AD bisects angle BAD is this angle up here at the top. So I always ask myself, what needs to happen in order for that angle to be bisected? Well, I need angle 3 and 4 to be congruent to each other. So if I know that my triangles are congruent now, I can say angle 3 is congruent to angle 4 because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And because 3 and 4 are congruent, I know that line AC bisects angle BAD, and it's just my definition of an angle bisector. So my suggestion to you guys is that as you're working through these proofs, look at your image. If I know that I need this angle A to be bisected, ultimately what I need is to prove angle 3 and 4 congruent. So we've got to prove our 2 triangles congruent first, and then we can use CPCTC to prove our angles congruent that we need to prove that our angle is being bisected. Now let's look at another one. Let's see here. How about number 9? So I'm going to start out here with my given. I know that angle W is congruent to angle Z, and that K is the midpoint of WZ. So let's see how that helps us in our image by getting things marked. So I know that angle W is congruent to angle Z, and K is the midpoint of WZ. So WZ is this line right here in blue, and if K is the midpoint, then I know that WK and KZ are congruent to each other. So let's mark that in our statements. WK is congruent to ZK. I'm just keeping my corresponding parts in the same order. And this is because of my midpoint. Definition of midpoint. Now, I only have 2 things marked right now, so here's where we need to go through our checklist of 3 things to look for. we have some vertical angles at angle 1 and angle 2. So I can mark those two guys congruent and make sure that we list it in our statements. They're already numbered for us, which is nice. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And because vertical angles are congruent, if we look at our image, I now can see that I have angles and a side wedged in between. So let's name our triangles. Be careful with your bow tie and the order of your letters. So if I use WKX, I have to name the other one ZKY to keep those corresponding parts in the right place. So angle, side, angle, congruence. Now, if we're looking to prove that K is the midpoint of XY, so XY is here in yellow. In order for K to be the middle of XY, I need to show that YK and XK are congruent. Well, now that I know that my triangles are congruent, I can use CPCTC to show that. So if I say YK is congruent to XK, that is my corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. You'll notice that we always use CPCTC after we've first proven that our triangles are congruent. And now we can say that K is the midpoint of WZ, and that's just our definition of midpoint. We've got to prove our triangles congruent first before we can move on and use CPCTC. Our triangles have to be congruent in order to make that work. Now, let's look at one of these down here at the end. Let's look at number 11 because I do have a little bit of overlap here. So on number 11, we are given that BC is congruent to ED. And angle ADC is congruent to angle ACD. So if I'm following my setup here, I have angle ADC. So all of this angle here is congruent to angle ACD. So all of this angle here. Now, we do have a little bit of overlap. We're trying to prove that BD is congruent to CE. Whenever we are looking at this image, we do have some vertical angles, but they're not really going to help us out this time. Tomorrow we'll talk more about our overlapping triangles. But if we take into consideration the pieces that are being used here, I'm going to use BC and I need all of this angle. So what this is doing for us is it is separating these triangles and this whole image into two triangles that we're looking at. Now, when we look at what we just highlighted, you'll notice that CD gets highlighted twice. That's our reflexive piece. CD is congruent to DC, keeping my corresponding parts together. That is my reflexive property of congruence. And now I already have enough to prove my two triangles congruent by side, angle, side. So if we look at the yellow triangle, it is triangle BCD is going to be congruent to triangle EDC. There is my side, angle, side congruence. And ultimately, we want to prove that BD is congruent to CE, and we can do that right away now that we know that our triangles are congruent. Notice that in our names, BC and ED are in the same spot. So I know that BC has to be congruent to, we're looking at BD. BD and CE. All right, so same thing. Let me change that up. BD and CE are congruent, and that's our CPCTC. I highlighted the wrong ones there, but they are in the same spot. So if we look at BD, that's here, and there's my EC. They are corresponding, and if the triangles are congruent, then those two legs will also be congruent as well.